Okay, I think we're live. Hi everyone and welcome to my channel, or welcome back if you're a previous viewer. My name's Nikki, and in this series I've been working on for the last year and a half nearly, I have been talking a bit about my language learning, and today we're continuing, and as you can see from the banner, we're talking about some of my favourite things in language learning. So in particular, some of my favourite things in the languages that I learn, which will probably be a slight repetition of some of the information given in earlier videos of why I started learning languages, but I'll try and bring in a few new bits as well. Forgive me if I sound a bit awful today. We've had really major storms here over the weekend. We've had a lot of power outages. This morning I went to the supermarket and they'd had a power outage, so there was just no fridge and freezer stuff at all available. So I got absolutely drenched because it's still raining and I could only buy half the things I needed. So I'm a little bit bedraggled. My nose keeps running since I got back in the warm. So bear with me if I sniffle a bit through this video, but hopefully it will clear up shortly. So let me just get rid of that banner now. There we go. So this is just going to be a quick little video, just recapping some of my favourite things, as I said, in the languages I learn. And let's start off with Icelandic. So Icelandic is a language I started learning because I became interested in Norse mythology and the Icelandic sagas, and had this desire to read them in the original, which I've never quite reached a stage where I could do that. But I also really enjoy Icelandic movies. There's been some really great movies I've seen in Icelandic, particularly in that sort of Nordic noir genre. And the same goes for TV series. I've seen some really good Nordic noir Icelandic TV series as well. In terms of films, I guess something like Rams was really good, which was then remade in English, though I think the Icelandic original is better. The titles have gone out of my mind now, but I have seen quite a few good Icelandic films. So obviously the sagas I love, the Norse mythology I love, and that probably ties in quite nicely to moving into Danish. So Danish, again, I came into Danish because of Mads Mikkelsen, the actor, who I'd seen in Hannibal and really became interested in. So I started watching all his backlist of films, which many of them were in Danish, which got me into Danish cinema. I really enjoy Danish cinema as well. I like the Nordic noir stuff, the same as Icelandic, but I also really like the comedy in Danish movies, particularly the more black comedy style that they have a lot. So definitely for me, film and TV is the big thing with my Scandinavian languages. So let's stick with Europe. Czech, it's musicals for me really in Czech, because that's one of the main reasons I started learning the language. I went over there to meet my pen pal, and I did fall in love with the place and the food and the sound, the language, but it was really the musicals that caught my interest, and I still love listening and singing along to Czech musicals now. So Italian, let's go. In Italian, opera is probably the biggest thing. I like opera, and I like the sort of pop classical music of singers like Andrea Bocelli. I also quite like some of the classic literature, but probably for me, music in Italian has been the biggest thing. And then French. So, sorry, I'm sniffing away. I just really snuffled since I got back in from the rain. For French, musicals again have been a big thing. The sort of rock opera style musicals of La Révolution Française, Notre-Dame de Paris, Romeo et Juliette. But also literature. I'm a huge fan of classic French literature, so Victor Hugo, Dumas. So I've also done a lot of reading of those in the original language as well. That's probably for me the biggest. Musicals and classic literature are probably my biggest thing in French, I would say. So German, to wrap up our European side of languages. So For German, absolutely musicals all the way. I learned German, obviously, as I said in previous video, at school. So I didn't get any choice. You had to learn German. But after starting to learn it, I really got into German musicals. And this high school period for me was when I really became a big musical theatre fan, because I was reaching an age where, certainly by my mid-teens, I was allowed by my parents to go to London on my own to see a show. So I did used to go up to matinees initially. Wasn't allowed for the evenings then, but I started to go to musicals a lot more. And I used to go to Dress Circle, which was a shop in London at the time. I think it's only online now, where they only sold musical theatre related CDs, DVDs, merchandise, that kind of thing. And so it was there that I started to buy some German language and French language musical CDs and DVDs. So my absolute favourite German musical or German language musical, it's actually an Austrian show, is Elisabeth. And it's a show that I'll mention again in a little while, in Asian languages too. But there have been some really great German musicals. Tanz der Vampire, Mozart, Marie Antoinette. What else? Obviously, Elisabeth, I already mentioned. But some really great shows that are among some of my favourites. So moving into the Asian languages. So perhaps I'll start with my most recent one, which is Chinese. And I got into Chinese mainly because my sister-in-law is Chinese. And everyone's always been bugging me, why are you learning Japanese and Korean when you've got a Chinese sister-in-law? Why aren't you learning Chinese? So I decided to start some. But Chinese, it's not a culture I'm as familiar with as the other two Asian languages, because it's, as I said, it's newer in my learning, literally a few months only. But so far, I mean, I really enjoy, I've really enjoyed a couple of Chinese TV series. I don't watch a lot of them, but The Untamed I adored. And also recently I loved Love Between Fairy and Devil. But also I have gotten into reading, because of The Untamed, I've gotten into reading some Chinese Danmei boys' love novels as well. So I'm reading the Scumberland's Self-Saving System at the moment, and I've also got Heaven Official's Blessings to start. I've watched the anime of that on Netflix. So yeah, Chinese is harder to say, but I'd say I quite like those kind of fantasy costume dramas, the sort of cultivation settings, and I like some of the boys' love that also kind of in many cases comes under that as well. So Japanese I got into because I started to watch anime and read manga. And it's always been the case for me, if I get into watching something in a language, I generally want to start learning that language because I want to understand better than just the subtitles, like what I'm hearing and some of the cultural aspects and things. So, I mean, obviously those are two big factors for me in Japanese, but I also love Japanese musicals. There's a lot of anime mangas that have been turned into musicals. So the Black Butler musical series, I'm a huge fan of. The Death Note musical too is really great. And Elisabeth is put on a lot in Japan as well. So, which I mentioned earlier, if I had to pick one all-time favourite musical that I couldn't live without, it would probably be Elisabeth, because I love it in so many different languages, in the German original, but also in the Japanese and Korean productions. So that's probably a good point to move on to Korean, which is our final one to talk about. And Korean, I started learning Korean because of Korean dramas, and I'm a huge fan of Korean dramas. But I also love Korean. I've gotten really into Korean musical theatre. So they do Elisabeth as well. They've done the Death Note musical in Korean too. I like the Western musicals done in Korean, but I also like a lot of their original productions. They do quite a few small-scale original musicals too, some of which I've been lucky enough to see either clips of or, in some cases, the whole show, because the last 2 years, Daehakro, which is an area in Seoul that has a lot of small theatres, has been doing a festival where they've been streaming some of the shows online on YouTube for free. So I've been able to watch a few on there, which has been awesome. So for Korean and Japanese too, I should mention literature. So I'm not at a stage where I can read those in the original yet, but I do really enjoy Japanese and Korean literature. So I've been reading a fair bit in the last few years in English translation, and my hope eventually is to be able to read them in the original, but that's still a bit of a way off yet, to be realistic about it. So those are some of my favourite things. As I said, this was a super quick video today. I will be back with one more video, which will be slightly longer, I expect, which will come in about 4 weeks' time. And it's going to be the final video of this series. So we're wrapping everything up. What I'm going to do in that last video for the year and for the series is to talk about how my language learning went this year, because earlier this year I talked about my plans for the year. So I want to look back and see how they went, what worked, what didn't, and look ahead to what my plans are moving into 2023 with my languages. So I hope you will join me back here again then for that final video in the series. And in the meantime, I'll say goodbye. Bye for now, everyone.